Welcome to the NonProfit Voice, a podcast series brought to you by NonProfit Pro, the go-to resource for nonprofit management and strategy. In each episode, we're going to sit down with leaders of nonprofit organizations, the people responsible for paving the way for our sector, along with key technology strategy partners who are transforming our industry. Here at the NonProfit Voice, we'll have refreshing conversations in which we will all learn more about the convergence of nonprofit and technology. Be sure to follow us on social media and visit our website to find more episodes of the NonProfit Voice. And you can download all of the NonProfit Voice episodes on iTunes, Google Play, or Spotify. We will have all the links down below. Hey everyone, welcome back to the NonProfit Voice. I'm Nhu Te, Editor-in-Chief of NonProfit Pro, and I'll be your host for today's episode. And as always, thank you so much for joining us today. This podcast episode is brought to you by NonProfit Pro in partnership with Philadelphia Insurance Companies. Learn more at phly.com about their 30 years of providing customized insurance solutions that meet the unique needs of nonprofit and social service organizations. On the line with me today is Scott Wehrlin, VP of Risk Management at People Inc. Hey, Scott, I'm so happy you're joining me today. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you for having me on.
Fantastic. I'm so happy to hear it. So before we jump into today's topic, I usually get started by getting our audience more acquainted with our guests. So to start, Scott, tell us about your background and how you found yourself at People Inc. and, of course, more about the organization itself.
Sure. Yeah, I've been in the risk control engineering for insurance for approximately 25 years prior to coming on board with People Inc. People Inc. was one of my insured clients, and they reached out and we're looking for some guidance and support in regards to fleet management. And I've been with People Inc. for approximately 1 year as their risk manager.
Fabulous. So you are going to be our expert on fleet management today.
That's correct.
So I've invited Scott to join me today on the podcast to, get into a deep discussion on auto fleet management for nonprofits. We're going to talk about some of the associated risks and liabilities, preventative action steps, and a lot more. So to begin, Scott, I think auto fleet management is, maybe not a term that a lot of nonprofits know about. So tell us more about what it is and how it can apply to nonprofits.
Sure. The biggest exposure issue with fleet and nonprofits is obviously, especially at People Inc., we're obviously transporting persons served. And that's where the concern comes in, is because, if you have a motor vehicle accident with persons served, it could be a rather catastrophic event depending on the scenario of what happens. So what you really want to be able to do is to try to control that exposure and limit your liability from those incidents from occurring. And, there's obviously, which I know we'll get into, many things that nonprofits should be doing to control those exposures.
Very well put. Like you said, we need to control the exposures and, limit the liabilities. And so that really comes down to having proper fleet management practices. So, can you talk about what the risks and liabilities are for nonprofits that aren't really prioritizing these practices?
Sure. Obviously, as I mentioned, you've got the issue of persons served in the vehicles, and the variations on that becomes, size of vehicles, who you're transporting, the frequency of how frequent you're transporting folks, and the drivers that you're actually putting in the vehicles. And there's a lot of the variations on obviously the nonprofits out there that how they're using their fleets. For us at People Inc., we've got about approximately 300 vehicles on the road at any given time. So it's a pretty significant exposure just being the miles driven with persons served in the vehicle. And that's where we get concerned about turnover issues in nonprofit agencies, getting them properly trained, and obviously understanding the vehicle characteristics of the vehicles that they are driving.
Yeah, I think, people might not think of it this way, but fleet vehicles are used pretty often in nonprofits, whether it's a food bank transporting food or, and transporting people or any kind of goods or services. So what are your recommendations for nonprofits on how they can best protect themselves as organizations and their staff and volunteers?
Sure, there's a multitude of things that I think nonprofits should be doing to really control those liabilities, as we mentioned. One of the things that we do at People Inc., and I think that many nonprofit agencies are starting to get into this, is GPS monitoring of their vehicles. Obviously, continued fleet training is extremely important for those drivers that you've got in the vehicles. A good accident investigation program is always key to learning from the issues that happen with the drivers, having a good formal follow-up on that accident when it occurs. Getting the drivers behind the wheel, the vehicle they're actually driving. I know a lot of driver training programs, they want to do a lot of it in a classroom session, but I'm a firm believer in getting the people behind the vehicle, having the driver trainer in the vehicle with that driver, really gets them a little bit more comfortable with the vehicle that they're potentially going to be driving quite frequently, obviously, and in our case, with persons served in the vehicle. And the last point is really vehicle maintenance and having a good vehicle replacement program. As your vehicle tends to age, things start to break down, and having that vehicle replacement, vehicle maintenance program with brakes, tires, whatever it may be, is critical to the process.
Excellent. And, you talked a little bit, I want to dive into offering training for drivers of fleet vehicles at nonprofits. Is this something that you recommend all nonprofits offer to their drivers or make it a requirement if they're going to be using fleet vehicles, or is there certain nonprofits that should be looking at that over others?
Sure. Some of the basic components that I think all nonprofits should be looking at for their fleet and their driver training is a couple of variations on vehicle training at hire. We train all our employees if we know that they're going to be driving vehicles at hire, getting them much more comfortable with the rules of the road, having a better understanding of the GPS monitoring program. I do think that, when there's a change in vehicle type, whether it's, going from a sedan or going into vans or what have you, there's another opportunity there for driver training that I think that people need to be very comfortable specifically with the vehicle that they're going to be driving. We're a firm believer in, and what we do is if a driver does have a driver motor vehicle accident, that we will pull them from driving until they go through our formal new employee orientation training again, because we want to make sure that they have a better understanding of, obviously something went wrong if they had that motor vehicle accident, and that we want to make sure that all our drivers go through that program again so that, we know that they have a better comfort level in what went wrong, and maybe there's an area of improvement that needs to be done with that driver before putting them back on the road. And then obviously with the driver training, we have the classroom session as well as we, as I stressed before, getting them behind the wheel. And we like to try to do that every 2 to 3 years because, you don't know how often someone might be driving characteristics change, everything with, weather changes and everything else that's been happening. We want to make sure that our drivers are continually updated on new rules of the road, laws that have been enacted, and other things that have changed potentially with the fleet, so they have a better understanding of where our agency is going. And obviously, I think that's important for all nonprofit agencies to follow.
So the other thing that you mentioned earlier that I want to dive a little deeper in is GPS tracking. Obviously, it's good to know where drivers are at any given time. So can you share more information about GPS tracking, how nonprofits even implement it into their vehicles, and more about its advantages?
Sure. Our GPS tracking program is actually provided to us from our insurance carrier because there's a partnership there in regards to how that process works. And how we use it is we don't just use it for, and then it is one form that we use it is actually knowing where our vehicles are located. But we also track and monitor and get alerts on if someone's speeding, hard braking, hard acceleration. And we review that data, and we make sure that all our drivers are aware that we are looking at that information on a regular basis, 24/7, that the alerts come through. And if we think that, someone's been speeding over a certain, miles per hour over the speed limit, we will pull them from driving and make sure that they again go through that driver safety training. And so they have a better understanding of what the exposure is. And what we found is that we have a lot of, which I'm sure a lot of other nonprofit agencies have, we have a lot of rear end collisions. And obviously there's two reasons for that. It's usually a higher speed and also following distance too close. So that's an exposure issue that we want to make sure that we're addressing. And obviously going back to the liability exposure issue, that liability obviously is a rear end collision. Your insured vehicle hits another vehicle, that's usually coming back on that nonprofit agency. So those are the areas that we're really focused on, is preventing those rear end collisions, and then as well as having a better understanding of the backing injuries as well. But again, going back to the GPS tracking, I think that has been an incredible important part of our success in reducing our incidents per mile driven, because we were looking at that and partnering with our insurance carrier. That was one of the main focuses that was really a concern for all of our insurance lines, was the fleet safety and driver training. And I think that the GPS tracking program has had a significant part in improving our overall fleet safety.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And you can never be too safe when, especially when you're responsible for other people's lives.
Right. One thing I'd like to add in regards to the GPS tracking, I strongly encourage, depending on who their insurance carrier is, to reach out to them and partner with them, and maybe they might be able to supply the GPS tracking units at no cost to the nonprofit agency. And that has been a tremendous, obviously, benefit to us, as well as a cost savings in regards to implementing that program.
Great. All right. So earlier we talked a little bit about the recommendations you have for nonprofits in protecting themselves, their staff, and their volunteers. Are there any other preventative measures nonprofits can take to ensure that they're doing their part in minimizing the risks and liabilities?
Sure. I think that it's important to also talk to your fellow nonprofit agencies and learn from what they're doing. And I think this is a tremendous tool of what we're doing here to further educate people on what are other agencies doing to try to control those costs. The other thing that we had mentioned before is that I think it's important to also reach out to the experts in the field. And again, where we try to focus our efforts and partner with our insurance carrier, insurance broker, and getting advice from them and tools and other talking points that we can periodically send out to our drivers in regards to what's happening there. And again, I think it's also very important to talk to the DOT, and again, talking to other nonprofits and how they're dealing with that is obviously very important. And always looking at continuous ways to make improvements to your fleet safety, whether it's looking at, and one of the things that we're trying to do is embrace technology in regards to forward collision avoidance devices in the vehicles, and updating our fleet so we've got the latest and greatest technology to put the odds more in our favor for preventing those type of incidents that we've seen in the past.
Excellent. All right, Scott. So we've talked about a lot today. Do you have any advice? What's your one piece of advice for nonprofits from everything that we've talked about today?
I think my biggest piece of advice for nonprofits, especially in the fleet safety realm, is don't always just assume that, well, incidents are incidents and our insurance rates need to be our insurance rates for motor vehicle accidents and fleet safety. Look at implementing things that are out there. Look at the GPS tracking programs. Look at improving your overall fleet safety training, because a little bit of prevention can go obviously a very long ways. And obviously we talked about the liability exposures. They're tremendous out there. And obviously insurance costs and costs of motor vehicles and the incidents that occur are not going down. So the more important to put effort into this moving forward. Obviously everyone's budgets are getting hit all the time, and it's not an area that you should be spending more than you need to. And obviously, reducing those fleet exposures and reducing those incidents that seem like they're always going to be there is probably the best piece of advice I could give.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I mean, taking the preventative steps, and honestly, from everything that we've talked about today, there are clearly so many resources that nonprofits can take advantage of to, best protect themselves and their fleet vehicles.
Right. And I'll say this is that, in coming on board with People Inc., we've implemented a lot of these items that we're talking about, and obviously continuously looking at other avenues to improve. And we've seen our losses drop by probably 2/3 just by implementing the GPS program and improving fleet safety and driver training. So these things do work. It's just a matter of making sure that you have the proper follow through and getting the help and advice from the experts that are available to you.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well, that about wraps it up for today's episode. I first want to thank our audience for listening on today's podcast. And of course, Scott, it's been such a pleasure having you on and, having this conversation with you about such an important topic. So thank you for joining us today on the Nonprofit Voice and sharing your insights and expertise on fleet management.
Thank you for having me, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
And so on behalf of NonProfit Pro, we will see you on the next episode of the Nonprofit Voice. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Nonprofit Voice. You can listen to more episodes of the Nonprofit Voice at nonprofitpro.com/podcast/the-nonprofit-voice. And remember, for your convenience, you can stream any and all episodes of the Nonprofit Voice on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify.